Good morning. I'm Susan Rice and Pat Spangler, or Pat Meisinger is beside me, and we're going to interview Bob Spangler from Murray. Today is the 10th of March, 2016. And Bob lives at Murray right now on 8118 12th Street, but he has an interesting life, so we're going to ask him some questions. Bob, do you want to tell me who your parents were and where they were born?
Well, Harold Spangler was born out in Louise, Nebraska. Mother was in Kansas someplace, I don't know where. Her family is from down there, and then they moved to Nebraska.
Do you remember the year, or how long were they married?
Well, mother died, it was about 60 years before she passed away, and then Dad passed away at 96.
I remember him.
Two older sisters, older than him, still alive. They both lived to be better than 100.
That's pretty good. You might live that long yourself then.
Well, I hope not.
When they moved to Nebraska, did they come to?
Well, see, my dad's family come originally from Pennsylvania. And he had a brother that lived here south edge of town. Now that would be on the other Spangler side, like Charles and
Okay.
Richard and them. And they settled in the Plattsmouth area, and my grandparents settled out in the Weeping Water area. And they lived on a family farm out northeast of Weeping Water. And they finally, I don't know how this all come about. I know my grandpa says there's 7 kids in the family, and the dad finally started farming the ground after he moved back from out west. And we moved to Plattsmouth in '39.
You told me that you had gone to country school.
I went to Sunnyside Country School. Now I don't know the number of it anymore, but the building is still there, somebody lives in it, I don't know who. But Neil Lancaster come out to visit. I remember him as just a young man. See, and I was pretty young. I left Sunnyside in the 6th grade and come to Plattsmouth.
So you were born, did you give us your birth date?
27.
Okay.
March 14th, so he has a birthday coming up. Do you remember anything about Countryside School?
Well,
Sunnyside.
Sunnyside School. We used to, there was 6, 8 kids in it most of the time. Walked to school, 1.5 miles every day. We did, one time we had a teacher that lived over pretty close to us, and we used to ride in the rumble seat of his old car.
And where was Sunnyside?
Right?
Where was the school?
Sunnyside.
Where was it
Where
located?
It's, about 5 miles north of Weeping Water and about 3 miles east in that area.
Do you know if it's still standing?
The house is still there, there's somebody,
Lives there.
it's an acreage now, and I wouldn't have any idea. And there was usually 3, 4, 5 families going to that school, different. And there's still some of them around the country.
You told me that your dad farmed
He farmed until
there in Weeping Water, or
Yeah,
outside of Weeping Water.
the drought and stuff in the 30s. Things got pretty rough, and one of the few people left that worked horses in the field. I've worked horses when I was 7, 8 years old. And
Do you remember when your dad got the first tractor?
well, he had an old tractor, I can remember that, because cutting wheat, he hooked the old tractor up to that, and he put me on that, and he rode the binder, and he had a rope going up to the clutch so he could stop it.
Didn't quite trust you.
And then we'd come out to the end of the field, you always made a circle 8 to make the turn. he'd jump off the binder and come up and turn it, because I wasn't big enough to steer it.
Strong enough, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I got an older sister and a younger sister. One of them's in Florida right now, the older sister, and the youngest one's in Hawaii. Been there for, oh God, probably 30, 40 years.
Which is which?
Younger one, and
Norma is in
Norma's in Florida.
Florida and Shirley's in Hawaii. Why aren't you over there?
I spent enough time back in the
In the service?
40s
Okay.
over there. I was stationed in Hawaii for a while,
Oh.
or on maneuvers out of there off of the ship.
Do you want to tell us which ship? And you obviously must have been in the
Well,
Navy.
To start with, a bunch of us skipped school here when we was in the 12th grade.
Here in
In
Plattsmouth.
December, went up and signed up for the Navy because we didn't want to go to the Army. In January, we went to Great Lakes for boot camp.
And what year?
That was in 40, well, we signed up in 44. In January 45, we was in boot camp in Great Lakes.
Do you remember who you signed up with?
Jim O'Brien and there was a Harold Hart here, and it seemed like there was another guy.
Okay.
But Harold didn't pass physical. So, but Jim and I went to boot camp together.
Did you end up on the same ship?
No, I lost track of him,
Oh,
and
you don't.
I went from boot camp, I went to Shoemaker, California, to a receiving base to get transferred someplace. And I got transferred into the Fleet Post Office in San Francisco to go to school. And on the way in from riding the bus, somebody pulled alongside and said, Germans just give up. So that went over pretty big. Well, I went to school for about 3 months, and I was on draft heading to the South Pacific. When the Japs gave up, I was still in the post office, but the next day I was on a ship heading for Guam. So
And then,
How long were you on
Yeah.
Guam?
I spent 9 months in Guam in the Fleet Post Office. And then they transferred me to Okinawa to be in charge of the post office up there. I spent 9 months there, and I come home on leave, and went back, they put me on a ship, and I was on that for 9 months. And we spent that going over to Pearl Harbor, and around there on maneuvers all the time, and then went in dry dock in Seattle, Washington, Bremerton, Washington.
What was Hawaii like at that time? We know it was
Well,
the center of a,
The bars are all the same.
okay.
No,
They
it was good.
small
I
compared
had
to,
good duty. I had one of the best jobs in the Navy, mailman.
yeah,
You know, back in them days,
yeah.
that's all you had. And,
yeah.
and when I was aboard ship, everybody liked mailman.
Yeah, you're a pretty important guy,
I
yeah.
took my laundry up and got it done separate. I went to the galley anytime I wanted.
So we always hear a lot about letters being censored. Was that somebody that was in your same office?
They didn't censor after I got in.
Okay, it was early.
They was before. They would black out.
Yeah, I've seen that on movies and TV,
Well,
you know.
it was, but see, the war was over time.
Sure.
I was
So
over there
it was,
and didn't have any trouble. I've often wondered what them islands look like now, but,
yeah. So you didn't think about staying in the Navy?
well, I spent 3 years and I signed up for a minority, and the day before I was 21, I got out. I had considered it, but I didn't.
Which came back to Cass County.
And I went to work the next day after I got home down the shops, and my job was open.
Did you ever consider trying to get a job at the post office since you had?
I checked on the Haka one time,
Mhm.
but you had to live in the
Oh,
Yeah.
route
You don't
at
now.
that time to get it. Now you don't.
no.
At that time you did, but I had a good job there at the shops, and I worked there until I went to farming in 2 years, and
And where was your first farm?
right there by where I'm at, well, just west, a half mile west.
Okay, which would be half-mile outside of Murray,
Yeah,
and it's not there anymore.
no,
Okay.
well, see, our house burnt down.
Yeah, I don't remember that, but I do remember the cement block one.
Tim was a baby when
Okay,
it burnt down. And then we moved over on Doc Gilmore's, and of course, you know the story on him.
So when would you have moved to the Doc Gilmore's place? where
I've
you
been
are?
there, well, Tim's 56,
Is that your son?
and
Yep.
he was just over a year old. So I've been in that house for 55 years.
maybe you should tell us your children's names and what the years they were born.
And you,
Well, Wendy was born in 1950. Chris was born a year after.
Oh, 52, because you were married in 50.
Yeah, 52.
And your wife was, we better put that in here,
Gwen Spangler, or Gwen Burton.
Gwen Burton, okay?
And then Chris was born a year after Wendy. And then Tom was born 4 years after Wendy. And Tim was born 8 years after Wendy. So I had
Even
one
numbers.
getting out of college, one getting out of high school, one out of grade school all the same year.
And so Gwen was your wife and the mother of your 4 children. And then you, in 1994, you told me that you married Norma.
Well, Gwen and I parted ways after 30 years, and she's living in Texas with her son now, youngest son.
Tim's down there.
And then I finally married Norma after her husband died.
Okay, and that was in 1994.
And,
You said you worked at the shops. What was your job there?
well, to start with, I loaded lumber and cleaned up around the sawmill and stuff. Then when I got back out of the Navy, the same day I went to work there, well, they advanced me to a painter, and I painted cars, and finally worked up to where about all I done is cut stencils and stuff for painting, and then I started farming.
If I can go back to your parents, your dad, you said after they lost the farm and they moved to Plattsmouth, that he
He worked on the viaduct there in Murray,
in Murray.
built it. And of course, farm kid, I was lost after school got out that year. I was in 6th grade. And the original central building up here, that 3-story building. And I was lost after school was out, so Mom would pack my lunch and I'd go down and sit in the car while they built the viaduct.
Now, how'd you get down there?
Dad
Would
and
come,
about 4 or 5 other guys drove from Plattsmouth down there. And I'd sit there and watch them all day, and then the next week or so, they took me out to Grandpa's out, Edgar, and I spent the summer out there and then come back. And of course, after that, well, then I was carrying papers all over town here and always had a job.
and that would have been what year they built that viaduct then?
Well, that was 39 when I was down there.
Okay.
And it was kind of getting on the finishing touches.
Well, and we just heard this week that they're going to start
Redo it.
working on it in 2018 to replace it, so it's been there.
So do I go sit in the car over there and watch them?
You ought to.
absolutely.
Yes, you ought to.
So, Bob, you lived in Plattsmouth.
I lived, well, to start with, we lived up here by the Columbian School.
Okay.
Dad rented a house there, block north of the Columbian School.
Okay.
And then we moved over just 3 houses east of the Christian church that's here now. And we lived there till I got out of, well, till I married, and then I moved up to the north part of town. And then finally moved down to Murray.
The house where you have lived for many years, Dr. Gilmore's house, who had lived in that
As
before
far
you?
as I can know, it started out the Walkers, who come up here from Virginia after the Civil War.
Okay.
And that family was there. They had 2 daughters. Well, the one daughter married a doctor there, Gilmore, in Murray, and they lived there. And then Charlie Meade moved into it. And then me, that's all that's ever been in that house.
Do you think the
Born-
Walkers
It
built?
was built in 1874.
So do you think the Walkers built it?
I would say they did, or had it built.
Was that our doctor, John Gilmore, that was his father
That
that
was
married
it.
the Walker?
He was
wasn't
just
it?
a general
Practitioner.
doctor, and
Right.
Country doctor.
yeah,
Mhm.
went to horse and buggy out,
Sure.
and Doc Gilmore, the one I know, deal with, his mother tells about how the Indians used to come and stick their nose on the windows and stuff, you know, looking in. So that house goes back one of the
Yes, it
original in the community.
And it was a 2-story.
Mhm.
Um,
Well, there used to be a section on the west end of it that they called the washroom or cob room.
mhm.
That's where they kept the laundry and stuff. And the kitchen was right next to that. And it had the old hand pump
In the kitchen.
in the kitchen from the cistern.
Mhm.
And the house had what they called, what was it? Some kind of light.
Kerosene?
Gas light. No, it was a gas pipe. There's pipes
Oh, really?
all through that, carbide lights. And there's still pipe in the house.
Isn't that amazing?
Some of that stuff was still there when I remodeled it. And it had the big parlor and a big screened-in porch on it and stuff. Well, that about fell off, and I put that room on the east end. And
Did it have stained glass windows?
there's one in a big picture window, we call them now, but bay window.
Mm-hmm.
And it had it's not stained colored,
Colored,
but
okay, colored
it's,
glass.
it's white,
Oh, okay.
chalky colored. Above, there's, so much window above it that's,
So the house was probably a little bit above the average,
oh yeah, at one time that was fancy out.
I would think, if it had the gas lights and things. Interesting. You said your mother worked at Jacob's Cafe,
Yeah,
and we know that's just down a couple of blocks.
Moms.
Well,
well, no,
it's a little bit this
little
way.
west.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's the one that's got a balcony
Oh, all
out on, you know, the
Yes.
upper stairs.
right. Yes.
Cause I can remember going down there and sitting watching the corn carnival. Mother worked there, and to watch the corn carnival parades and stuff while we go up on that balcony.
You said she worked at a sewing factory. Was that here in Plattsmouth?
Yeah, right here. Well, it was Legion Hall at one time, then I went to sewing factory. Right here, across from Lenders, that lower building that's just west of,
It
there's a
was-
station across
It
there.
was the bowling alley for a
Yeah,
while.
bowling alley
Okay.
too, and it was an armory at one time.
Yes, it was.
Well, that's got quite a history to it then. Do you know what they made?
They made silk men's
Pendleton,
robes.
Pendleton, it was pretty fancy clothes.
Really? I learn something new every day.
My grandmother worked there.
That was a big employment for ladies
Yes.
in town. And the shops and canning factory was the main,
And you said your dad worked at the canning factory.
yeah, he worked there, and then I went to work there when I got 16. And I have put in as much as 20 hours a day
There.
there at one time.
Farming we know. Really? Do you remember what different things that they used or canned?
Well, it was known for pork and beans, they can sauerkraut, green pack is corn, peas, and stuff like that.
Well, I was told once from someone that worked there that the peas would come down the assembly line and different labels would be put on them.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, one person would say, well, I don't want that kind, I want it by the dents.
Mm-hmm.
And same with pork and beans.
it's all the
It's
same
all come out of the
mixture.
same pile.
We used to get the unlabeled ones from Nebraska City from a friend, and we'd have to sit down and go by the code to
Yeah.
see what it was before we opened it. Otherwise, you'd have 3 cans of different things. That's interesting.
I cooked
You were
a
a
lot
cook,
of them.
so how big was the pot, or was it huge?
Great big thing. You put 30 crates of cans about like that in it. And I blowed one of them up one day.
Ooh. Where was the building?
No, I just blowed out against, steam blowed out, gas had blowed out and hit the tin wall.
So you could have been injured then.
Not sitting on the stool over there.
Where was the building?
Down Rylander Park.
Paul told me to the north end.
Pretty, well, it was about halfway up. See, they had part of the round building that shops had.
Mm-hmm.
That was their warehouses. And then they had the long building right along the road there.
Will you ever work in the area where the produce came in?
Oh, yeah.
So,
And I strap cans, they call it, and when they come off of the capper, they put the cap on, well then I'd take them and set them in this big crate. And then they'd roll that over to the cookers and you'd pick them up with a hoist and
where did the produce come from?
around here. It was,
Local
local.
people?
most of it was raised across the river. But there was a lot of people right around here raised sweet corn. The peas, I don't remember any of them ever being raised here. They was across the river.
And when did it close?
Well, it was closed before I got out of the Navy.
Isn't that interesting that Nebraska City lasted through the
Well,
50s?
it was there, yeah, when we used to go down the city, there was
Yeah.
it-
Maybe even was the 60s before it closed.
Oh, I would say that in that area.
That's amazing.
But I would say Norfolk back down here closed, probably in the early 40s.
Would it be because they couldn't get the produce?
I don't
or
know, it just,
It just
things
closed?
changed.
Yeah. Yes, change.
Well,
Change
and
is-
stuff wore out.
Yep. And it's too
And-
expensive.
They do things different. But I've seen guys, when they was making sauerkraut, they got in it with rubber boots on to, mix it in them big tubs. Get out and walk down across the floor, come back, crawl in.
Let's hope they boiled it after that.
Do you have any remembrance about how many employees?
Oh, I remember.
Yeah.
This town, that's all employment between that and the river was the main.
Mhm.
And then after war got started, Martin Bowman went up here. And I can remember the guy that drove the bus when it washed down the main street in one of the floods and got jammed in that underpass there at the river.
At the river.
Was that a bus like a Greyhound type bus?
Oh, well, it was just one of these like smaller school bus. I don't know how many passengers, 23. But he run a line from here to Omaha one time, and he also had a line going to the barn plant for each shift. And
Yeah.
Was that the Cotner bus
Yeah,
line?
Cotner
Mr.
bus line.
Cotner. Mhm.
And it happened to be parking when it
Well,
flooded.
it was right here. See, they always done it here at the old hotel,
Mm-hmm.
right here.
Next
That
door.
North
was
of
a
the
depot.
light.
Mhm.
And it was in that, and the curbs used to be, well, pretty deep, wasn't it? The curbs on this street. And that was full of water, and that bus went down Main Street. Then it flooded the main buildings all along there one time. That was one of my jobs. I worked over at Sonicson's helped clean out the basement. And
Someone just had a picture posted
Yes.
on Facebook, and it blew a hole, you know, pretty good size in a brick building, which would be the VFW parking lot today.
Well, there was discrepancy where that was.
Yes, that was a question, but they said there's the
One
bank, or
person thought it was,
the hotel.
it showed the hotel, so
Well, my granddad used to live, great-granddad lived out here. And when Dad was a little kid, Grandma would bring the family back to see her folks. And Dad tells how they'd come down, walk down to here and cross a footbridge at the end of Main Street and get over and watch the steamboats tie up there just over the railroad tracks. I got a picture of them tied up there.
Do you remember what year that was?
Well, he'd have been a little kid, so it'd been back in the early 1900s.
Or before, possibly.
No,
It was
he
early.
was born in 1903,
Okay, all right, so yeah,
and he would have been a kid,
and we're still fascinated with floods.
yeah. But did nothing like we used to be a couple times a year.
Yes,
well, and with the high curves, it just made the street a river. It would just,
Well, water comes from Cruel. But my great-granddad lived, you know, that big brick house right behind where Ruffner had his,
yes, yes.
that was great-grandpa's house.
Spangler,
No, mother's side.
On grandma's side, Will's.
Wills.
Really?
Because we think of that as a Solomon
That was the
house.
Solomon House. Did they buy it from them, I
They
wonder?
must have.
Well, great-grandpa lived there back in the 1900s, so,
Okay.
because he farmed out west of Minard
Mm.
and fed cattle, and
West of Minard, and drove out there.
you know where, is it Leonard Hill?
Hill?
There south of Ron Noldy's and west.
Yeah, Lyle,
Lyle.
yeah, that's where he farmed.
That's,
Well, that was quite a jaunt.
and they used to feed a lot of cattle and drive them over to Minard.
That would be a heck of a ride every day.
Well, he lived out there at that
Oh,
time.
okay.
Then he moved to town when he retired.
Kind of the 8 Mile Grove Cemetery.
I imagine they're buried out there, but I never did go look. But there used to be a trail from Weekenwater and go across the corner of his farm out there.
I've heard about that trail that kind of went behind the cemetery and cut
Yeah,
down across
cut
the
down
creek.
across there, and there was, Dad always tells about the big hanging tree that they had there where they hung a bunch of horse thieves from
You're the
Weekenwater.
second person that's told me that.
He
Interesting,
knew where the tree was, it was out in the pasture there,
interesting.
but I don't imagine that would be.
Not
nothing.
genteel times. Paul and I happened to watch a show last night about antique machinery,
Mhm.
and they have a weekend over in Iowa where they still run all the old machinery. So I think you've probably seen, you said horses, and to what they farm with today, you probably just
Oh, it's all.
shake your head.
Cause I can remember back, oh, it was probably 34, 35, it was so hot. Dad put a lead team on, there was 4 horses like pulling a binder to cut wheat. So he put a lead team out on front, and I had to ride them to guide them. That was before he used a tractor. Cause it was just so hot that they didn't,
Didn't want to work.
and so he put a lead team, and I rode the horses.
So then that would have
And
been,
Then I did do field work, hair, I did stuff like that.
with horses.
And I had a runaway with 4 head of horses one night crossing the bridge. Dad seen them coming and got out there in the driveway and got them stopped before they tore things up.
So part of that show last night was people's favorites. So what color was your favorite?
The color didn't mean anything, because he had everything.
Had them all.
There was a pair of bay mares, they was the ones I usually work. They would just work too.
What were their names?
Bess and Fanny. Dick and Flory was a black gelding and a roan mare. Prince and King was,
Where did you go to buy horses?
well, my great-granddad out here used to go Dakota and get wild horses and bring down and break them. That was part of his business.
How long would it take to break a horse?
That depends on the horse.
Oh, I see, okay. Was he a horse whisperer?
I don't know.
Well, he must have been pretty good at it if he's buying wild ones.
Well, he'd buy them Mustangs and bring them in here by the carload, and that's what they done in their spare time.
So it was pretty individual how long you kept a horse?
Well, Dad kept his till he either died or,
Put him out to pasture.
well, he never done that, because they usually
They're still
passed
working.
away before that, and then we had our sale, and
Uh-huh.
he sold horses on the sale in '39, and that was about pretty much the end of horsepower.
Okay. So, I think you asked, what was that first tractor? Steel wheel?
Yeah, them wide steel wheels, fortunately it was.
Mm-hmm.
It was horsepower at that time, and then the International was just starting to come in, but I never was around them until I got to farming myself.
There was a dealer in Hawken, a dealer in Murray that I know I've
Well,
heard about. Nelson's?
I don't know,
Nelson's?
Nielsen, Weepenwater,
Okay.
they was,
Wasn't it
they were
Nelson Brothers?
fertilizer and stuff. Alice Chalmers, that was Ike Todd,
Like Todd.
and I bought
And
stuff.
Hep Hebner was in Nahaka. Harold said he worked for him.
I didn't know him.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's pretty, not in every town anymore. It's kind of,
No, every town had, well, see, Plasmas had the Alice and
John Deere.
John Deere, and then Kenny Wheeler, you know where Subway's at now,
Mhm.
that was International. That's where, I still got a tractor I bought new there, in '55.
Then it was a car dealer.
Well, you know what that was built for?
No.
Roller skating rink.
Oh.
Ray Store out here had a roller skating ring in there.
Time does march on, doesn't it?
It seemed to me like he built that when I was in service, because when I come home, I used to skate there.
Go to skate.
Then I'd go to the city and Gwen and I'd always skate down there.
So was the armory another big building built as an armory? That's
That
now
was that reserve
Okay.
outfit that was there.
reserves, all right. And that's why it was built.
Yeah. What was, I remember right there's, there was a house there and I used to take cream and eggs. And where Wardy's at,
Mm-hmm.
we used to take cream and eggs there to case, and then he moved, put it in his basement of his house over there.
That was still there when I came to town in '60.
Yeah.
The case implement over there?
No, the creamery.
Creamery,
Oh.
they had eggs.
Well, you know where they make butter? Here in town?
No. No.
Down just east of the locker, there's a building.
Yes.
What's that auto?
Greg Larson's.
They was made Casco butter.
Casco for Cass County.
I don't know how it come up, but I got a match, one of them little tin match
Yeah.
holders that you put
The
wood
box of
matches
matches in, yeah.
I got one of them from there.
Well, that's interesting because I have one from the creamery, from the case, it says Plasma's Creamery. Would that be?
That plastic was creamy, I think, is what they went by.
Well, I
But
have
the
one
butter
of those
was
too.
called Casco butter. And that was in that building east of the locker.
Well, maybe you and I have the last two wooden matchbox holders.
Oh, we have one, but it doesn't have a name on it.
It's hanging on
on
the
the
wall
fire-
there.
So is Mars, yeah.
Mine's on the fireplace mantle.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Bob, Dr. George Gilmore was the founder of the Historical
Yeah.
Society in 1936.
He was just an old man sitting on the street when I moved to Murray. You know, he wasn't doctoring anymore. And he lived over town there,
Which house?
Murray.
Which house in Murray?
I think it's the one, I think, Mike Gillott lives in it.
Okay.
I
Next,
believe that's the house.
next to Ferris.
Or it might have been the next one.
Okay, on that block.
Mhm.
Interesting. So he'd walk downtown, maybe
And
get his
sit-
mail,
there,
and
sit on
sit
the-
and visit with whomever
Well, there was, used to be a bench sitting in front of the bank there, and they used
to visit.
to sit there and talk all day, instead of going to coffee like we do now.
Well, I know you probably know our benefactor, Dr. John Gilmore's, as well as anyone. Can you tell us when you first met Dr. John and your acquaintance with him, well, until he died?
Well, Charlie Meade was getting ready to retire, they farmed a place. And I was living a half-mile west, farming 240 acres, and working out too. And then finally, Charlie wanted to give up that south farm ground, and I farmed it, and he kept the pasture. And then when Charlie retired, well, Doc and I sat down there in the fence row one day and decided what we was gonna do, and shook hands, and that was it. And we spent 30-some years
On a handshake.
on a handshake. But when we got to borrowing more money than Murray Bank would let us have for cattle, well, we had to make a contract out. But Doc and I farmed on a handshake, and we never had trouble with anything. If I wanted something, I'd go buy it and charge it to the company, and we'd settle up a couple times a year. We started out feeding probably 40, 50 head of cattle, and we wound up about 700, 800 there at last.
When did you quit feeding cattle?
When he decided he was gonna give the farm to you guys.
Oh, okay, so you kept cattle that long? Wow.
Where were all the cattle?
To the,
Different areas?
to the south there.
I had them in, well, there was 80 head in the south pasture. Doc had bought that not too long before I started farming. And I had 80 head of cattle in that one. Across the road I'd run 50, the rest of them in the feedlots.
And Dr. Gilmore stayed with you?
Oh, if he come back,
every
he
time?
always stayed there. In fact, he drove my pickup most of the time.
Yes, he
And
did.
finally he got to renting cars.
Any specific times you remember when he would come back?
Oh, and he'd come out and help me no matter what it was. I'd say, why ain't you worried about your hands, you know, his profession? Well, I don't think about that. And I have gone out there a couple times, stayed with him. He had quite a place up on top of the mountain.
Yes, I was never there. I know Doug Dewey was, I don't know if he was still living in that home when Doug Dewey was there several times, staying with Dr. Gilmore.
But he finally moved into another place, because that was up on a high place. You had to go up and drive by that.
Was that in Los Angeles or was that his
Oh,
address?
Santa Monica.
Santa Monica, a little bit south. How many grandchildren do you have, Bob?
Oh, Lord. Wendy's got 2 boys,
Okay.
and I never
Chris
seen.
has 2.
Chris has got 2, and Tim's got 3.
Okay.
Tom's never been married.
Okay, so it's
7.
just 7.
And then,
I won't go for grades.
well, I got,
Oh, maybe you know, okay.
yeah,
Chris has 2.
Chris is,
Chris is,
no,
He's got 2 he has 2 grandsons.
he's got a son and a daughter,
Yes,
and each one of them's got 1.
1 boy.
And then Wendy, her last son just got married here not too long ago. They got 1 baby but 1 boy, and the other one's got 2 kids, and I've never seen them.
Okay, that's 5.
And then Tim, they haven't got any
5.
kids.
7 and 5.
But
Not too bad.
Tim's 2 daughters come down and see me pretty regular. They live up here. Well, one moved into Gretna not long ago. The other one's in Omaha. She just got back from teaching in Spain
Oh,
here a year ago, and she's working Omaha U now.
do you have any final thoughts for us, or?
Well, I've enjoyed my life, and
There you
I'm
go.
ready to say the heck with it.
With a cup of coffee.
Yep, I gotta go to my coffee every day, and
where is that?
BP station,
BP Beaver Lake.
and I go 5:30 in the morning and get at 11 o'clock. Now I'm sitting up here and them guys are probably.
Is that a
talking-
different bunch of people?
What?
Different bunch at 5:30?
No, pretty much. See, in the mornings, there's quite a few different working people.
Mhm.
And then in the afternoon, it's just Joe Hesher and his son and me and Butch Sands and sometimes another or two around. But in the mornings, there's, well, like Chris stops over there about every morning, and Leonard Kaffenberger.
Well, Bill Ferris and
I haven't seen Bill since he's.
Teddy Brandon went.
Ted used to be there every morning.
Well, we know where we can find you guys if we need you.
Sounds like a good life, Bob.
Chris,
Well, we really appreciate you coming in and telling us your memories. You've told us a few things that we didn't know.
For sure.
well, I can remember the old school and stuff up there. But the old high school where it's at now,
Yeah.
that's where I went.
Sandy did.
Yeah.
Paul
And-
did.
Then that first building, it was a 3-story building, and I don't remember too much about it, because I think they tore that down just after I went there, and then they built the other one next to it.
Everybody wants them to fix it up, but it just doesn't seem possible.
Well, what you gonna make out of it? Too many steps for old people.
Have to have elevators.
Big elevators, that's right. So, well, can you still make it in time for second shift?
Well, I gotta go down and get my tomato seed. And I went to Weeping Water, got my corn yesterday.
Oh, my, so you have a garden, obviously.
Why raise more sweet corn than anybody else around? I never sell it.
Give it away.
Neighbors all come help themselves.
Yeah.
And the raccoons?
Yes.
No,
They don't.
I trap them, I recycle my coon. And I put electric fence around it.
Does that keep them out?
Well, pretty much,
Do you put a couple strands up?
3.
3.
1 ground wire and 2 hot ones.
So that's the secret, okay.
And then I set traps and
They love my flower boxes. The minute you put anything in, that fresh dirt, they are there immediately to put it out.
go out and take and feed the buzzards with them. Because they really enjoy them too.
That's right.
So
It's the
I
circle
don't
of
throw them
life.
away, I just put them out there and use them.
Recycle.
Okay, we appreciate you coming in this morning.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you,
What
Bob.
did they do? Put this on?
They'll put it on
Paper?
a DVD
Oh,
or a CD. We'll give you a copy.
okay,
You can show it to your kids.
well, they'd have to do it.